Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and I have a question for you. If I were to tell you that you could make the slice quilt that you see behind me here using only 20 10-inch squares of fabric with no fabric waste, not one thread of those 20 squares gets wasted, and you don't need any additional yardage to create the quilt top. Would you believe me, first of all? And second, would you want to make that type of a project? If so, keep watching the rest of this video so I can tell you more about how you can make the slice quilt and a ton of other projects using the first ever Crafty Gemini quilting ruler and template. This right here is my 10-inch slicer. Alright, so let me tell you a little bit about how I developed the 10-inch slicer. I was getting a lot of requests from some of my Quilt Club members who were saying that they have these 10-inch square fabric packs in their stash. They're gorgeous collections. Obviously, they bought them because they like the collections. They go really well together, so they're fun to use because you don't have to do any of the matchy-matchy work. You don't have to decide on color value or what colors are going to go. The manufacturers and the designers have already done the work for us. So people are starting to have these collections of these pre-cut 10-inch square packs. Then they would write me to tell me that they want to create quilts using the 10-inch squares, but all the patterns they seem to find require additional yardage, right? You have to cut the squares into different shapes, you have some fabric waste, and then you have to add additional yardage to create some type of a background, a neutral, a solid color, and things like that. For most designs, that will give you some type of contrast. And so they didn't want to do that. People were telling me they'd be at home, they grab the stack, they're super inspired, they want to make a quilt, but they can't go out right then to buy additional yardage. So they've been sharing their frustrations with me because they say, I like the collection, I want to make a quilt just using the squares without it looking as boring as just sewing the squares together in rows and columns, right? So I developed my 10-inch slicer. Now with this 10-inch slicer, in the most simplest form, you create the slice quilt, which is slicing your 10-inch squares in two places, so you end up with 3 separate parts, and then we switch around the different slices that we've cut out from it with the other blocks. And the reason it works is because the fabric collections all work perfectly together. They're part of a collection, right? So we don't have to do any of that work. So it's still just as simple as sewing the blocks together in rows, but we get the secondary design that gives more dimension, more texture, and it just overall makes it look like a funner quilt. And it's a lot more fun too to create than just piecing squares together, okay? So in the most simplest form, we create this slice quilt. Now, my 10-inch slicer, I am manufacturing this myself. Right now, really the only place you can buy this is off of my online shop. So right now, we're launching it off. The price is $16.95 in the US, which is an amazing value. It's not a one-trick pony. You get to use this template for a ton of different designs, and it has multi-use because instead of just being a shape to be used as a template, I've also included the screen printed grid lines on here for the measurements. So if you have a measurement that can fit within the size of this template, you can also use this as your ruler. So let me tell you a little bit more about the 10-inch slicer, and then I'll go to the table and show you all a close-up shot of how it can be used in a simple sense, okay? It measures 10 inches long on the one side. Down here it measures 6 1/4, and at the top it measures 2.5 inches. Now, if you're a quilter, you know 2.5 inches is a very popular measurement in quilting. I specifically did it that measurement because you can use this. Imagine this side is not there. You can use this as a 2.5 inch by 10-inch ruler because all the proper grid lines and the numbers are there for you. So for me, sometimes, anytime I have 10-inch squares left over, I will oftentimes cut them up into 2.5-inch strips and use them to create scrappy bindings. So you can do that here as well. And I will be including video tutorials on all the different ways that you can use my 10-inch slicer on a link that I've included in the description box below for you. There's already some bonus projects there for you to check out in case you want to see kind of how it's used for different things before you go ahead and make the purchase. Now, there's also a link in the description box below on where you can head over to my site so you can buy these. I am manufacturing them myself, so obviously the production runs are going to be in smaller numbers. So if you're interested, go ahead and grab it now because I always just have limited numbers of them in stock, okay? Since I don't have a warehouse. So we are going to be selling these in smaller batches. All right, so it has a hole up top here for hanging. That was one of the requests that I received from a lot of my club members, is that people like to hang their rulers and templates for storage. So we have added that. We're also using a higher grade acrylic than our first production run, and it has all the information on here. Now, the way that it comes when you purchase it, it comes shrink wrapped and there's a label on here. Now, on the label, it has some of the ways that it can be used, but there's also a link down here, and that's going to be the link that lives on my website where all the video tutorials, troubleshooting tips and tricks, that use the 10-inch slicer will be posted. So if you notice, there's no actual pattern that I sell with this or class or anything right now. You can buy the 10-inch slicer and immediately start using it because I've already included some easy to follow video tutorials on a few different ways to use the project. Now let me show you a different quilt. The slice quilt behind me requires the slicing of the squares, but you can see that this fabric and this fabric is the same. So the background of each square is the same fabric. You can do that, that's one way, but you can also do it this way where you end up switching so that the background, like in this example, the background squares are different fabrics. So every square, every block here is made up of 3 different fabrics. And the way that I did it, this is called Black and White Collection by Jennifer Sampu for Robert Kaufman. And I'm not a huge fan of neutrals, but I love contrast. And so if you notice, and I'll walk you through how I made it look a little bit more contrasty, if that's even a word, is that I did black, like a dark and dark for the backgrounds. And so the slice is the light. In this one, you can see the background fabrics are 2 different ones, but they're both lighter compared to the dark slash in the middle. This one, again, we have our dark fabrics as the background and a light slash. So it goes dark square, dark square, light square. But within those squares, you have light slash, dark slash, light slash, dark slash. So you get this really cool overall design and look. And again, this was made using just 20 squares from that entire 10 by 10 stack of fabrics, okay? This is going to be, I think, a go-to quickie project for people to crank out over the weekend. Now, I'm pretty fast at sewing, but I can crank out one of these quilts, take it from cutting to piecing the entire quilt top in under 2 hours. So, say you're a little bit slower at sewing and cutting than I am, you could probably make that still in less than 5 hours, okay? Baby quilts. You can see this one would make a great quilt for a man or a boy. You can just switch up the design and the overall look of the quilt by choosing the fabrics, which is amazing. You can do a more juvenile design if you're making a baby quilt or something for a young child. You can use really cool fabrics that are out there. I mean, there's so many different collections that you can use, and you don't have to worry about matching it up because the pre-cut collections have done all that work for you. So I even have this Kansas Troubles fabric, which is really, really traditional type of darker colored fabrics. And although you look at the design, you think it's really modern. It's really bright, but it looks like that because it's done in these cotton and steel fabrics, okay? So if you were to make it out of more traditional type of fabrics, it would give it a totally different look, and there's so many ways that you can do it. Now, another example that I have, and this is a freebie project that's included in the link in the description box below, this pillow top was also made using my 10-inch slicer. Instead of creating the sliced block, which you can see here only has 1 slice, the quilted pillow cover here was created using my double sliced block, or the X block. You can see that the square was slashed twice. And we create these X's, and then when we match them up, if you look and see what we end up with, we get an octagon in the center. So there's so many different designs that are now coming out of the way you manipulate the blocks and the way you slice them. Not to mention that the template also has grid lines on it, so it's also a ruler. So I think a lot of people are going to want to add this to their stash. There's so many projects that you can make with it, and I will be offering free video tutorials on the different designs that you can use, and they'll all be archived on the link that's included on the label here on the 10-inch slicer. I've also included the link below, and it can be found right at my website. So going forward, I will be selling, because I know several of you out there like to have hard copy patterns. We're in the process of printing some of those out for the more simple designs, and those will be available for purchase as well. But that's it. It's $16.95. We're offering it right now with a flat rate shipping of $3.50 to ship anywhere in the United States or the U.S. territories. International friends, the price is the same for you. The shipping cost is a flat rate of $7. So if you're interested in snagging your 10-inch slicer, make sure to click the link in the description box below, grab one, and now I'm going to leave you with another clip and showing you how exactly I use it. So let me grab one of my squares here from this collection. This is one of my favorite collections. It's called Birds and the Bees by Tamara Kate from Michael Miller Fabrics. All right, so there's my 10-inch by 10-inch square, and you can see my mat is a little bit bigger. This is a 12-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch mat, so it works out great. So my 10-inch slicer, you can use this like this. Notice the wording is backwards on it. You can use it like this. You can use it like this, upside down, forward, reverse. And so because it has this asymmetrical edge to it, you'll be able to get so many different designs and projects out of this that I really think this is going to be a go-to template for you to have in your stash. So let's start off with this edge. I'm going to line it up so that the 2.5 inch, the short side here, is at the bottom of my square. and then we're just going to follow along the edge of our template here and cut. Okay, now I can remove the template, and I'm just going to spin this around 180 degrees and do the same thing on the opposite side. Again, I'm lining it up with the 2.5 inch side, and I'm going to line it up here, and then I'm going to cut. So what you end up with is your 10-inch square chopped into 3 different pieces. Okay, now the center piece gets pulled off to the side, and you're going to repeat this process to another block, okay, in the collection. And I'm just showing you here the most basic sense of using this template. This is like the most basic design. Okay, so here's another square, and I'm going to repeat the exact same thing I just did. Again, lining up the template with the short side towards my body, lining up raw edges here, here, and here. Gonna cut, turn, get separated just so you can see it's been cut. Repeat it, short side is towards my body. And now with these 2 blocks, what we've done is we've cut out this strip right from the center, but I can come back, take the strip that I took out of the other pink square, insert it here, okay? And the idea is that we would sew these together, and then you end up with that block. And as you can see, there's not going to be any waste, because these middle strips, we are now using them to switch them around to some of the other different blocks from the same fabric collection. So the good thing about using those pre-cuts is that you get a good variety of fabric prints in there. You can see that I would do that then to this pink block. And right there, I've used up 2 squares, and I have 2 totally different blocks without any fabric waste or without adding any other additional fabric. So that's the basic sense of the basic idea of how to use this. So here's that sample quilt that you saw on the wall. It's called Sliced. This is my sliced pattern using my 10-inch slicer. And if you look closely, you can see how the blocks were cut. This came out of there, this was flipped, and this way, and this came out of there, and then this center slice came from a different block. So if we look closely, let's look at this one. The slice that I cut out from this purple fabric has been inserted in this one, okay? The slice that I cut out of this teal one was switched over to this one. And so then I just go and kind of match them up 1 to 1, finding some contrasting print. So you can see that this is my light fabric and this is my dark. And I always look for that high contrast whenever I'm designing something, okay? You can see here, this is the dark in this case, and this is a light. So if you insert and swap around those center strips, you get a really cool, more secondary type of design, but you're still just using the basic 10-inch by 10-inch squares. So I think this is a super quick quilt for you to whip up. And then I did some hand quilting on this one, as you can see. So these are just a few of the most basic ways to use my 10-inch slicer, just so that you know this is the design that allows you to use the slicer and not have any fabric waste. Of course, when you start slicing it multiple times, there's going to be trimming that needs to be done, and there's going to be things like that. So you will have some fabric waste in something like this. But if you like this design in the most basic sense, this is how you'll be able to do it with no additional yardage needed and no fabric waste. So definitely make sure that you use the link in the description box below if you want to get your hands on my new 10-inch slicer. I hope that you all enjoy the 10-inch slicer. I hope that you're able to get your hands on one pretty soon before they sell out. And I just wanted to thank you all for your support. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.